every lesson on Olympus was taught kindly. Some were taught as warnings. It started, oddly enough, with Athena. As goddess of wisdom and craft, she once carved herself a simple flute and tried it out beside a quiet stream. The sound was lovely, but her reflection in the water was not. Cheeks puffed, face twisted mid-note, she looked nothing like the composed goddess she was supposed to be. Athena tossed the flute into the undergrowth without a second thought and walked away, muttering a curse behind her. Whoever picked it up next would regret it. That someone turned out to be Marsyas, a Selene, one of the goat-legged, goat-horned woodland spirits who kept company with Dionysus. Marsyas found the abandoned flute half buried in the ferns, and, being neither vain nor particularly informed about divine curses, he simply picked it up and started practicing. Badly at first. Then, over months and years of quiet persistence, remarkably well. Deer stopped grazing to listen. Streams seemed to slow their ripples. Villages emptied out to gather at the edge of his glade, drawn by music that felt like it belonged to the forest itself. Success, as it so often does, went to his head. Marsyas grew convinced that no instrument, divine or otherwise, could match the sound of his simple flute. And in a fit of confidence that history would not treat kindly, he challenged Apollo himself to a contest. Apollo accepted without hesitation. The 9 muses were called in to judge, along with a mortal king named Midas, whose taste in music would later prove exactly as reliable as his taste in wishes. The terms were steep. Whoever lost would belong entirely to the winner. Apollo played first, and there's really no adequate way to describe it. Golden light seemed to move with his fingers across the strings of his kithara, and the crowd fell utterly silent, caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. Marsyas played his best after that, genuinely his best, skillful and heartfelt. But skill built over years in a forest glade was never going to outshine a god who had, quite literally, taught the muses how to dance. The vote wasn't close. All 9 muses chose Apollo. Only Midas, alone in his judgment, favored Marsyas, a decision that would later cost the king rather more than his credibility. Marsyas knelt before Apollo and accepted his defeat, as the terms required. What followed afterward is the darkest chapter of Apollo's story, and it's one best understood rather than watched. Apollo's fury at being challenged did not fade with his victory, and the punishment he inflicted on Marsyas was severe enough that even the old storytellers seemed reluctant to linger on it. The glade fell silent afterward. No birdsong, no music, just stillness for a very long time. It's said that Apollo himself came to regret what he'd done. Years later, standing alone at the edge of that same quiet glade, he transformed the sight of Marsyas's suffering into something gentler, a clear river winding peacefully through the Phrygian countryside, carrying the Selene's name forward in a kinder form than his death had. And the flute that started it all, Apollo passed along to Dionysus, as if he no longer wanted any part of it. It's a strange, uncomfortable story, and Apollo doesn't come out of it looking merciful. But perhaps that's the point. Even a god of light and truth had a temper that could tip into something darker when his pride was wounded, and the myths never quite let him forget it.
His next story starts more gently and ends in tragedy of a different kind entirely. In the region of Boeotia, King Phlegyas had a daughter named Coronis, famous even among mortals for her beauty. One afternoon, bathing in a quiet lake shaded by willow trees, she caught Apollo's attention, and the two fell into a love affair the king apparently never learned about, or perhaps never approved of. Either way, it didn't last as purely as Apollo believed. While he was away, Coronis gave her affection to a mortal man named Ischys, son of a neighboring king, betraying a god who valued truth above almost everything else. A snow-white raven, Apollo's own sacred bird, witnessed the whole thing and flew straight to Olympus to tell him. Apollo's fury, once provoked, rarely stayed contained. He turned first on the messenger itself. The raven's snow-white feathers darkened to black in an instant, and ravens have carried that color ever since, a permanent reminder of the day they delivered news no one wanted to hear. Then, his anger turned to Coronis herself. Some say Apollo struck her down directly. Others say it was Artemis, avenging her brother's honor with her own golden arrows. Either way, Coronis didn't survive the betrayal's discovery. Almost immediately, regret set in. As her funeral pyre was lit, Apollo realized with sudden clarity that Coronis had been carrying his child, and whatever anger he still felt toward the mother, the child was blameless. With a god's speed, he reached into the flames and pulled the infant free before the fire could claim him. He named the boy Asclepios, and rather than raise him himself, entrusted his care to Chiron, a centaur unlike any other, wise and gentle despite his fearsome half-horse form, already famous as a teacher to some of Greece's greatest heroes. Under Chiron's care, deep in a cave on Mount Pelion, Asclepios grew up surrounded by herbs, remedies, and the patient art of healing. He turned out to be extraordinarily gifted at it. Word of his skill spread quickly, first through nearby villages, then across the wider Greek world, as Asclepios proved capable of curing illnesses that should have been fatal. But he didn't stop there. In time, Asclepios learned to do something no mortal healer should ever have been able to do: bring the dead back to life. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it became a problem, specifically Hades' problem. Down in the underworld, the god of the dead noticed his kingdom growing strangely quiet. Charon sat idle at an empty riverbank with no souls left to ferry. Cerberus lay bored at the gates with nothing to guard against. Furious and more than a little unsettled, Hades marched up to Olympus to complain directly to Zeus. Zeus understood the problem immediately. If mortals stopped dying altogether, the entire order of the world, an order he'd spent centuries carefully building, would collapse into chaos. Reluctantly, and without much ceremony, Zeus struck Asclepios down with a single bolt of lightning. Apollo's grief was immediate, and so was his fury, though there was nothing he could do about Zeus directly. Instead, he turned his anger toward the ones who'd forged the weapon in the first place. The three Cyclopes, Argus, Steropes, and Brontes, laboring endlessly at their mountain forge. Apollo found them there and, with 3 precise arrows, silenced their hammers for good. Zeus did not take this lightly. A father's grief was one thing. Killing the craftsman who armed the king of the gods was quite another. As punishment, Zeus stripped Apollo of his golden robes and lyre and sentenced him to a period of exile among mortals, sent down to serve as a humble herdsman for King Admetus of Thessaly. Some say it lasted a year, others say 8, some say 9, and that it covered both this offense and the earlier killing of Python. However long it lasted, Apollo spent it tending sheep and goats in the hills of Thessaly, a god reduced to the simplest of mortal labor. He didn't complain, and he didn't do it badly either. Admetus, without knowing exactly who his new herdsman really was, treated him with genuine warmth and hospitality, the kind of welcome the old stories always insisted mattered, even to strangers. In return, Apollo brought his Cythera out into the pastures each day, and something remarkable happened. Wolves that once stalked the flocks paused at the sound of it and simply sat down to listen instead. Under Apollo's quiet watch, Admetus's herds not only survived, they flourished, growing larger and healthier than they ever had before. When his sentence finally ended, Apollo returned to Olympus, restored to his full radiance among the gods. But he never quite forgot those years among mortals, or the earlier ones spent among the Hyperboreans in their land of endless daylight. And so a pattern settled into his life that would repeat every year from then on. Each autumn, as the first snow began to dust the peaks of Olympus and Parnasse, Apollo would climb aboard his swan-drawn chariot and fly north, toward warmth and eternal spring, leaving the mountains behind to their winter silence. Then, every spring, he'd return. The snow would melt, the temple at Delphi would stir back to life, and Apollo would resume his place there, delivering the oracle's prophecies and presiding once more over the Pythian games. From Delphi, he'd travel on to Delos, the island of his birth, where the Greeks held a festival in his honor nearly as grand as the one at Delphi itself. It became, in time, less a single story and more a rhythm, the god of light and truth, moving in an endless, faithful cycle between three sacred places, each one carrying a piece of who he was: the mountain where he ruled, the temple where he spoke for the gods, and the island where, once, on a barren, drifting rock in the middle of the sea, he had first opened his eyes to the light he would spend the rest of eternity giving to the world.